Welcome to our Neurodiversity Scholar Series with Zosha Zaks. For this talk, I've asked Zosha to consider the question, what should we know about disability language? My name is Amy Accardo. I'm with the Center for Neurodiversity at Rowan University. We're a cultural center within Rowan's Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and have two aims: to situate neurodiversity in our DEI initiatives and to value and prioritize neurodiversity culture. Welcome, Zosha. We're excited to be working with you. If you'd like to start by sharing a little bit about yourself and then jump right into the question, what should we know about disability language?
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. A little bit about me. So I'm an autistic adult. I was diagnosed when I was 33. My professional training is as a rehabilitation counselor, and I have worked with autistic and other neurodivergent teenagers and adults for a little over 20 years. Currently, I'm helping organizations, schools, and businesses figure out how they can make their spaces and their practices neurodiversity friendly. I also teach disability studies courses that look at all of these issues through a social justice lens. And so this question of language does come up quite frequently. I'm gonna tackle this question of what language should we use from two directions. One is how we talk about disabilities, but the other direction is how do we talk to people, how do we talk to disabled people? So the first point I want to make is that what we can do, both disabled people and non-disabled people, is try to catch implicit bias that shows up in language. For example, people will use the phrase, he is wheelchair bound. The issue is, well, first of all, we don't really bind people to wheelchairs, but also it gives a subtle flavor that somehow that's a less, a lesser way of living, a lesser way of being, that it's not good. It's not good. But most people in the wheelchair using community view their chairs as a tool that enables them to be free and go where they want to go and not have to wait for somebody to bring them every place. Sometimes we'll refer to disabled adults as girls or boys, even though they're, actually, full grown adults. So we want to watch that out, because you see what happens is packed into the language is those implicit ideas that disabled people remain childish their whole lives. Telling people or families, I'm so sorry, or I'm sorry, for those parents, because that enforces that idea that it's like this big tragedy to be different. So we see these, those are just a few examples. There's a few more on the slide. Another one that we see a lot in textbooks that I'll focus in on for a second is autistic people are woefully deficient in social skills. Again, there's no questioning there about how society is structured and how the structure of society might be impacting the situation. So when we refer to disabled people, the two main ways that we do this, one is called person first. And the idea is you put the person first and the disability is second. This we see in formal writing like newspapers, and it was developed because people wanted to acknowledge personhood. So they're a human being, they just happen to have this disability. But inadvertently, it can wind up stigmatizing disability. So many self-advocates prefer what we call identity first. And you put the disability front and center, because for many disabled people, it's a central part of who they are, and there's no shame to it. And by putting it out there, it destigmatizes. Yeah, I'm a disabled person. That's okay. Generally speaking, it's important to go by what self-advocates prefer and to let disabled people and disability organizations take the lead on how they want to be called. Here's some examples just to give people some clarity. I'll just pull out one or two. The students with autism are holding a meeting next week. So that's that classic person first formula. Instead, what we're seeing now is that many autistic people prefer to just say the autistic students are holding a meeting next week, because there's nothing wrong with being autistic and it's just who I am. So that's that shift to identity first language that we're seeing. The other big important point about language when it comes to autism is the high functioning and low functioning language debate. So traditionally, high functioning autism was used to refer to an autistic person who had good language skills, didn't have intellectual disability. In fact, a lot of times people would say, oh, I didn't even know you were autistic. I couldn't tell you were autistic. Low functioning was formerly used to describe autistic individuals who had more obvious autism traits and maybe struggled with language and maybe had intellectual disability or more obvious challenges. The problem is that, first of all, it's very offensive. Nobody likes being called low. It's dismissive. The fact is everybody needs help. Even if you can do a lot of things, you still need help in some areas. It's also not very helpful. It doesn't tell me anything. If you just say, well, he's the low functioning guy, I don't know how he communicates. I don't know what he's working on. I don't know what he can do. Okay? It's also biased because essentially when you set up this dichotomy of high functioning and low functioning, the implied, the implied value there is that normal is where you want to go. So you want to be, as normal as possible. And so it kind of, is packing a lot of prejudice into this language. It's harmful. A lot of people who've been labeled high functioning feel like they have to mask their traits so that way they can appear high functioning and won't seem like they have any problems. But vice versa, people who are called low internalize that. It really denies human complexity, and in history, it has been used in eugenic ways. So what can we do instead? Well, one strategy I call the support language strategy. So that's when you just focus on, who the person is and what supports they need. So instead of saying he's low functioning, you can say he does not use speech to communicate. He uses a text-to-speech app on his iPhone. Or instead of saying she's high functioning, just say she's starting college this fall and she's going to need some accommodations because of her slower processing speed when she reads. Right. So I have a good idea of who they are, what they're going to need, and I have not artificially divided them into this high-low category that's very stigmatizing and problematic. Another strategy I call just the facts strategy. So again, we move away from artificially putting people into these categories that can be very limiting and stigmatizing, and we just share the facts of the situation. So instead of saying, oh, he's too low functioning to go to McDonald's by himself, we can say he loves going to McDonald's. He can use the visual menu to order his food. He does need a support person to provide transportation and to help him with paying. Okay, well, and that's also very useful. The first sentence is not very useful. A reverse example is she's too high functioning to need a job coach. Okay, again, it doesn't tell me what's going on in her life. It doesn't tell me what she needs or what her strengths are. Instead, if we just give the facts, she earned a bachelor's degree in statistical analysis and she really wants to work in the field, but she's going to need a support person to help her with all those planning aspects of attending job interviews. And she's also going to need a support person to help her once she gets a job to identify and request sensory accommodations. Okay, so now I have a real full view of the person. So those are good strategies. Again, when you're thinking about this high and low functioning language issue, really work hard to strip bias out of your language and catch those those implicit assumptions that are like packed in there. And I think it's fair to say we're still developing autism language. And so one thing that you can do as an ally is to support self-advocates in describing their experiences and coming up with new terminology. And also just keeping an eye, if you see biased terms being used in your classroom or at work or in the media. We're even seeing research studies moving away from these terms because they're so problematic. So that's something else you can do too if you're conducting research. Great example of why high functioning and low functioning language just does not work. David and Hari just graduated this year in May 2022 from UC Berkeley. They are non-speaking autistic students. So you see, if we had just lump them into low functioning category, we may have inadvertently assumed they never wanted to go to college or they couldn't do it. And we might not have provided college readiness courses in high school. So we really want to get away from artificially putting people into high and low boxes that really serves no one. The last point I want to make about disability and language is how we talk to disabled people. So I have some tips here that come out of what disabled people have said bothers them the most. It's very important to talk to disabled people directly, not their assistant or as a friend who's there supporting them. Also, don't change the tone, pitch, or speed of your voice. If the other person needs some kind of accommodation, they will let you know. Don't avoid subjects or vocabulary that you think disabled adults can't handle. They are adults. They do talk about adult topics and are interested in adult movies, events, you know, all the things that adults do. Don't ask private questions that you wouldn't ask, you know, in a regular situation. But you can ask honest questions if you do need information or you're really genuinely trying to get to know the person. And then lastly, don't act like the disability is invisible. Like, oh, I hardly could tell. Like, that's not helpful. The key is to just hang out together authentically. So in summary, watch for implicit bias that creeps into your language. Honor that identity first language if self-advocates prefer it. Don't use these high functioning and low functioning terms. We're really trying to get away from that. And talk to disabled people the same way you would talk to non-disabled people.
Thank you so much. It was such helpful and informative content, and your examples were really appreciated as well. So in addition to our own self-reflection and, you know, recognizing when we may inadvertently use either bias or ableist language and making sure that we, you know, shift that, do you recommend that we point out, or should we point out, or how should we point out if people that we're with, you know, use some kind of ableist or biased language?
Well, that's a great question. It really depends on the context, right? If you're very familiar with these people, it's your best friend, sure, you know, we call each other out on different things all the time. But I understand it can be very awkward if you're, say, in a more official situation at, you know, with people you work with or in a classroom. But one thing that you can do is, let's say you're part of a club and, you know, some ableist language is coming up, you know, instead of calling out one person where that might be a little uncomfortable, you could say, hey, as a club, could we look at disability justice issues one night? Maybe that could be an activity one night in terms of the social justice work that we're doing. And then you can pack that topic into, you know, the activity, the learning activity that you're doing that night. So there's little ways you can do that. You can bring it up as a classroom discussion. You know, let's talk about disability language today in English class, you know? So there's different ways that you can creatively still bring it up.
That's really helpful. Well, thank you again, Zosha, for working with us on this brief video series around neurodiversity. And the other video briefs with Zosha are available on our Rowan University Center for Neurodiversity YouTube channel, as well as on our website, which you can find by searching Rowan University Center for Neurodiversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.